السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. So before we begin, some housekeeping announcements. As Maghrib is continuously moving forward, the days are getting longer. Isha obviously becomes later, and that affects the time of the class. So inshallah next week and the week after, Isha, Salatul Isha here at Al-Hikmah Center will be at 8 p.m. So we're bringing Isha at 8 p.m. and that means that the class will start online inshallah and here at 8:30. 8:30 bidhnillahi ta'ala. So 8 p.m. Salatul Isha, 8:30 p.m. inshallah class starts for those of you online and those of you here as well. The second announcement is that we've added something to the portal for those of you inshallah, and all of you are, you have like a login to the portal. It's free. Why wouldn't you have a login to the portal? But one of the things that we added just literally I think a couple of days ago is the transcribed notes. So alhamdulillah, we have a couple of sisters who are very dedicated. Jazakumullah khairan. They have spent probably hours going through these videos and listening to me ramble on and then writing everything that I've said more or less word for word. So for those of us that aren't able to make the notes or are too lazy to make notes or whatever our excuses, it is a very good revision tool, because they have actually literally gone through everything. And not only have they gone through everything, the notes are color coded, because why wouldn't you color code them? And also they are referenced. So for example, the ahadith that I mentioned, sometimes you don't get the reference because it's too quick, or the verse number, you don't catch the verse number and the surah number, or some of the points that I go off on a tangent. I think more or less all of that stuff is included either in footnote form, in footnotes, or it is referenced, or it is mentioned in parentheses. So that's something which is very good. Not all of the lessons is not up to date, so it's not where we are currently, so it won't be all the way up to the end of Surah An-Nasr, but it is like a good section of it, inshallah, and we're continuously uploading. So bear with us inshallah ta'ala, but that's something which I would highly recommend, that you go to those transcribed notes and they are available inshallah ta'ala. That starts literally from lesson 1, so where we started with isti'adha and moving on from the isti'adha onwards. That's the second announcement. The third and final one before we begin inshallah is that for those of you here in Birmingham and across the UK, I suppose, as Kaka is nodding, we have our next al-Maghrib course coming in Birmingham, which is 24/7, the fiqh of dua and dhikr by Shaykh Walid Basuni, which is on the, is that the right date?
29th of March.
Okay, it says 22 to 24 here.
That was the wrong printer.
Oh, so 29 to 31st. 29th to the 31st of March. It's a good thing I picked that up. 29th to the 31st of March, inshallah ta'ala, at University of Birmingham. So Shaykh Walid Basuni, as you know, is a very dear friend and colleague, but he's also someone who is, when it comes to English-speaking du'at and shuyukh, probably someone who is at the forefront and one of our elders and one of the most knowledgeable, in my humble opinion, that we have, inshallah, who's well spoken in the English language, and so therefore I would highly recommend it, not least because he rarely comes to Birmingham. He's so busy that I think, how long since he last came? 2-3 years?
3 years.
3-4 years since he comes, so he only comes like once in a blue moon, literally. So this is a great opportunity, and it is a great course to learn about the fiqh of dua and dhikr, inshallah ta'ala, the 29th to the 31st of March, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Okay, so last week we finished with Surah An-Nasr, alhamdulillah, and this week we are beginning with Surah Al-Kafirun. And Surah Al-Kafirun, as you know, is the 109th surah of the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. In the translation of Abdul Harim, he says, say disbelievers, I do not worship what you worship, you do not worship what I worship, I will never worship what you worship. You will never worship what I worship. You have your religion and I have mine. And obviously one of the things that you notice straight off the bat is that there is what we would call in Arabic tikrar, repetition within this surah. That's something inshallah which we'll come on to at the appropriate time. So this surah, the 109th surah of the Quran, is a well-known surah. It's a famous surah. It's one of the surahs that not only have we all memorized, probably from a young age, but it is probably one of the most common surahs that we read on a regular basis in our salah. It's one of those surahs that if you ask someone what are the most common surahs that you read in salah, they'll say to you, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, right? And probably along with Ikhlas and Falaq and Nas, and maybe Kawthar and some of those other surahs, it is one of the most common surahs that we read within the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and within our salah and at other times as well. It has a number of names in the books of tafsir. Its most famous name is Al-Kafirun, right, which is the name that we all refer to it by. It is also known in its full form, meaning in the whole of verse number 1, Surah قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. And as we've mentioned a number of times, that is a common practice amongst the scholars of tafsir and even the scholars of hadith to some extent, Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah and others, when they speak about tafsir of certain surahs, they normally name the surah after the first verse. Right? Tafsir surah قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, or tafsir surah إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. Right? So that's also a very common way of giving a name to the surah. It is also from the names of this surah is something that we mentioned before when we spoke about Surah Al-Ikhlas, and that is that it is called Muqashqashatan. And we said then that Muqashqasha in the Arabic language means to absolve yourself from, to free yourself from. And Surah Al-Ikhlas was given that name because you free yourself from the worship of everyone besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a surah about tawheed, about sincerity, about the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. And likewise, this surah, Surah Al-Kafirun, is also similar. In it, we absolve ourselves from shirk and from the worship of anything besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the two surahs both have this name, Al-Muqashqashatan. Other scholars said that it is called Surah Al-Ikhlas. Surah Al-Ikhlas. So obviously we have Surah Al-Ikhlas, right? The famous one is Surah Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad. But likewise here it is also a name that is given to Surah Al-Kafirun. And that's something which we'll speak about in a short while. But it's mentioned in a narration, I think it's in Sunan Ibn Majah, in the hadith of Jabir radiallahu anhu, when he's describing the Hajj of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In one of the narrations, and that famous hadith is in Sahih Muslim, the long hadith where he describes and goes through the farewell Hajj of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But in a different narration, in a different wording, he says that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to the Maqam Ibrahim to pray the 2 rak'ahs of tawaf, so as we know, you perform tawaf 7 circuits, and then it is the sunnah to go behind Maqam Ibrahim and to pray 2 rak'ahs. They are known as the 2 rak'ahs of tawaf. He says that in the 2 rak'ahs of tawaf, قَرَأَ بِسُورَتَيْ الْإِخْلَاصِ. Within the 2 rak'ahs of tawaf, he recited the 2 surahs of Ikhlas. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ and قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Right? And so because he calls them the 2 surahs of Ikhlas, some of the scholars said that from the names of this surah is Surah Al-Ikhlas. Yes, always.
Well, it's more of a description than an actual physical.
Yeah, so it may be a description, so it may not be that that's necessarily a name, but it's describing the content, the subject matter of the 2 surahs. But irrespective, it is still something which you can say is the name for this surah. It's not a well-known name. Obviously, the well-known name is Al-Kafirun. Right? All of these are other names that you'll find in the books of tafsir. Another name, so we have how many so far? 4, right?
Surah verse 1,
Muqashqashatan and Ikhlas. So that's 4. Number 5 is Surah Al-Ibadah, the surah of worship. Surah of worship, right? Because obviously the word that is repeated over and over again is the different variations of ibadah. A'budu, ta'budu, ta'budun, abadtum, all of that, right? All of it comes from the same root word of ibadah and worship. So that's also from the names of this surah. And finally, number 6 is Surah Ad-Din, the surah of religion. And that's taken from what? The last verse. Lakum dinukum waliya din. to you is your religion and to me is mine. Right? And so therefore it is also from the names of this surah. So we have 6 names that are mentioned in the books of tafsir for this one single surah. And that's not, by the way, the general case. Like normally in the names of the surahs is 1 or 2. The fact that it has so many names like Surah Al-Ikhlas, like Falaq al-Nas, is an indication of how important the surah is and how widely discussed it is and how many scholars gave importance to this surah of the Quran. It is a surah in which the scholars differed, or about which the scholars differed concerning whether it is Makki or Madani, when it was revealed. Whether it was revealed before the Hijrah or after the Hijrah. And in the opinion of the majority, it is a surah that is Makki, pre-Hijrah, before the Hijrah. And that is the opinion of Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu an, a narration from Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, Al-Hasan al-Basri, Ikrima, and other scholars. To the extent that Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he more or less, kind of didn't even mention the second opinion, and he said that this surah is Makki. It has 6 verses, and it is a Makki surah. Meaning that it's almost as if he didn't pay much attention to the other opinion. Maybe he thought it was a weak opinion. So when Imam Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he does this, some of the scholars in the analysis or in the tahqiq of, the verification of the tafsir of Ibn Kathir and his manhaj and his methodology, say that Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he says that it is therefore more or less an issue of ijma', an issue of agreement, that the scholars consider this to be a Makki surah, even though that's not the case. But he is someone who only mentions the Makki opinion of this surah. Also someone who also does the same is Al-Imam Al-Baghawi rahimahullah ta'ala, in his Tafsir Al-Baghawi. He does the same as well, and he also mentions it only as a Makki surah. What do the other scholars do? They mention both opinions, like Al-Imam Al-Qurtubi and Al-Mawardi and others from amongst the scholars of tafsir, who authors of tafsir. They mention both opinions, and they don't necessarily pick one over the other, to show that there is a strong difference of opinion in this issue. So that's the first opinion, right? So as we said, Ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, Al-Hasan, Ikrima, and from the scholars of tafsir, Ibn Kathir, Al-Baghawi, rahimahumullah, they all said that it is a Makki surah. The other opinion, that it is a Madani surah, revealed post-Hijrah, after the Hijrah, is also a narration from Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. So that's also one of the narrations of Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. It is also reported on Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiyallahu anhuma, the famous companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and from the scholars of the Tabi'een and so on, Qatada and Al-Dhahhak. Qatada and Al-Dhahhak. So it's not just a fringe opinion. It's not just one scholar who came with this opinion. There are a number of scholars of the Salaf who said that it is from the surahs that were revealed after the Hijrah. The difference of opinion Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, and this is something which we'll come on to shortly. The difference of opinion seems to revolve around, number one, is there a cause of revelation for this surah? Because if there is a cause of revelation, then the cause of revelation that we have, and we'll discuss this and its merits and its authenticity or lack thereof, it is a cause of revelation that clearly puts the surah in the Makki framework, in the Makki time frame. So meaning that it was revealed before Hijrah. But perhaps some of the scholars who said that it was post-Hijrah either weren't aware of that cause of revelation, or they didn't consider it to be authentic, or perhaps because the surah deals in general terms. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, right? It is something which is very generic in its opening statement, in the opening verse that Allah Azza wa Jal mentions. Perhaps they said that it includes everyone and not just the Quraysh of Mecca, and this is something which we'll come on to in more detail as well. But there is, the point being, that difference of opinion. But the opinion of the majority of the scholars, and Allah knows best, is that it is a Makki surah. This is a surah, as we said, which is mentioned in many, many ahadith, and it's mentioned in many different, or on many different occasions, and it is therefore a surah which has a lot of emphasis placed on it within the Sunnah, and therefore it is reflected also in the books of tafsir and hadith and so on. So for example, it's reported in the hadith in Sahih Muslim on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, and this is just a rundown of in which context the surahs are this surah is mentioned in the Sunnah. It is mentioned in the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu in Sahih Muslim, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قرأ بهما في ركعتي الفجر. that the Prophet ﷺ would read this surah and Surah Al-Ikhlas in the 2 rak'ahs of Fajr, meaning in the 2 sunnahs of Fajr. Right? The 2 sunnahs of Fajr, which are often called the rak'atay al-Fajr. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said, rak'atay al-Fajr khayrun min ad-dunya wa ma fiha. The 2 rak'ahs of Fajr, meaning the 2 sunnahs of Fajr, before Fajr, are better than this world and everything within it. Right? So in this hadith, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says that the Prophet ﷺ, this was his common practice, that he would read these 2 surahs, Kafirun and Ikhlas, in the 2 rak'ahs of Fajr. And similar to it is a narration in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قرأ في الركعتين قبل الفجر والركعتين بعد المغرب 27 مرة أو 11 مرة قل يا أيها الكافرون وقل هو الله أحد. That the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم would read in the 2 sunnahs of Fajr, before Fajr, and the 2 sunnahs after Maghrib, and he says that I saw him do this either more than 20 odd times or 10 plus times. The narrator is unsure as to which one did he say, 10 plus or 20 plus. And so therefore you have what is known as Shaykh, right? The narrator has a moment of uncertainty, and that shows you to which level the narrators of hadith went in ensuring authenticity of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. That if they weren't sure, even though the narrator is a thiqah, he's a trustworthy, reliable narrator, but even the most trustworthiest of people have moments of, like memory lapse or forgetfulness, or they're not just sure of a certain, detail. And so they would mention both options, or they would mention what they are uncertain about to ensure authenticity of the narration. So he differs. 10 plus times or 20 plus times, in them the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr, the 2 rak'ahs after Maghrib, he would read قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ and قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ.
Shaykh, if in a hadith that if there is a mistake by a narrator in a hadith, does that make the hadith weak? So here I'm not talking about a mistake, but if someone was to say something which is proven incorrect by other evidence.
Yeah, so you have in the science of hadith, this is like an example of that, because this is Shaykh, this is the narrator is just giving you both options. But if, for example, there is a trustworthy narrator, and then there is someone who is more trustworthy that differs from him, then then the one who is more trustworthy is given a preference.
About the wives of the Prophet saying, who will die first? The Prophet said, the one who has the longest hand, I think, or arm was mentioned in Bukhari. And I think the later part of the hadith mentions that it would be Sauda bint Zama. Aisha said that, according to one of the narrators. And then later on you learn that I think Sauda was one of the later wives to pass away. So the hadith can't be taken in that sense.
But that's a hadith which isn't explicit either in terms of its meaning, because longest hand can mean different things in hadith.
I mean the addition by one of the narrators by saying it would be Sauda because she could.
But that's different. That's the understanding of a narrator of what the hadith refers to.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, you have the hadith, and this is going way off topic. But anyway, like the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, there is in Bukhari and Muslim, and he was speaking about the virtues of wudu on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and that the people who do wudu and they do wudu properly will come غُرًّا مُحَجَّلِينَ مِنْ أَثَرِ الْوُضُوء. They will come with light emanating from their arms, right? And so Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu would do what? He would consider it to be meaning that you wash all the way up, right? So he wouldn't just stop at the elbow, he would wash the upper arm as well, because he would say, I want my light to be increased, right? Why would you limit it to here? But he's the only one who did that. It's not reported, as far as I know, from any of the other companions that they did this. That's an understanding of the hadith, right? That's his interpretation of the hadith, right? That's his understanding of the hadith, and that's his tafsir. That's called tafsir al-sahabi. It is the understanding of a companion. But when you find that the majority of the companions differed with that understanding, therefore it is an issue of difference of opinion, right? Your example that you want to give was, for example, there's a narrator who is acceptable, he's trustworthy, and then there's another narrator who differs with that same narrator in an issue, is something, for example, like in the hadith of the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ married, was it Maymuna radiallahu anha, and they differ as to whether he, at which part he proposed to her. Right? And you have different narrations. Was it in the state of Ihram or outside of the state of Ihram? And the narration that is stronger is the one that says he was outside of the state of Ihram. And that's the one that's narrated by the person who was appointed by the Prophet ﷺ to go and offer the proposal to her.
So is the other hadith for shad?
No, the hadith isn't considered to be shad, but it's considered to be the wording of that hadith, or that particular aspect of the hadith, is considered to be a weaker point. So when you compare the two, you say that's a weak point because this one is stronger, because he's the one who actually went and he did it, and he knows when and how and where he did it. Whereas the other companion wasn't aware, and they just knew the general story, and they gave that narration to the best of their ability. And you have this very common in the Sunnah, where you get like companions differing over this issue. So that's like a whole, I don't even know how we got onto that, by the way.
You said that in the hadith,
20 or 10.
Oh, 20 or 10, yeah. But that's like a different issue, right? So the narrator, when he says, is it 10 plus or 20 plus, he's just not sure, because Ashra and Ashreen is very close in Arabic in terms of wording, and he just wants to be sure. The point here, therefore, being that it's something which the Prophet ﷺ would read in the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr, especially. And in this narration, the 2 rak'ahs after Maghrib as well.
How did the Sahabi know what he was reciting in the Sunnah?
So he says, in one wording, he says, Ramaqtu, right? He says that I followed the lips of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, sometimes when he would recite, even though he's reciting silently, if you're sitting close by, you can, like sometimes when someone's reading silently and you're close to them, you can still make out words of what they're reciting. And that's why he doesn't say he always did, right? Look at how precise the wording of Ibn Umar is. Can't make that statement because he wasn't there every day, wasn't there all the time. Can't say this was all the practice of the Prophet ﷺ. But clearly it was something which he did on a very consistent and common basis. Because even if it's 10 plus or 20 plus, shows that it's something which is common, right? And in the lifespan of Ibn Umar with the Prophet ﷺ, 10 plus, 20 plus isn't much, right? Considering you're praying Fajr and Maghrib every single day. So, but the point here being that it's something which is therefore, even in the books of Hadith and the explanation of Hadith, you will find that some of the scholars say that it is recommended. Right? It's recommended to read these 2 surahs in the 2 rak'ahs of Fajr. That doesn't mean that you can't read other surahs, clearly you can. But it is something which is part of the Sunnah to do so at least every so often. And similar to it is a hadith that is in Ibn Majah, on the authority of Aisha radiallahu anha, also authentic, in which she said, نِعْمَةَ السُّورَتَانِ, or rather the Prophet ﷺ said, نِعْمَةَ السُّورَتَانِ يقرأ بهما في ركعتين قبل الفجر قل هو الله أحد وقل يا أيها الكافرون. Blessed are the 2 surahs that are recited in the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr, قل هو الله أحد and قل يا أيها الكافرون. So again, virtues of the hadith. That's one, right? So it's therefore the common practice of the Prophet ﷺ in the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr, the 2 rak'ahs after Maghrib, that is reading these 2 surahs. It's also reported, as we mentioned, that the Prophet ﷺ would read these 2 surahs in the 2 rak'ahs of tawaf. So after he would perform tawaf, as is in the hadith of Jabir radiallahu anhu in Sahih Muslim, فَجَعَلَ الْمَقَامِ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ الْبَيْتِ فَصَلَّى رَكْعَتَيْنِ قال فكان يقرأ في الركعتين قل هو الله أحد وقل يا أيها الكافرون. Jabir radiallahu anhu says, and his is the long hadith, in which he describes the Hajj of the Prophet ﷺ from the moment that he set off from Medina all the way till the end of Hajj. It is an extremely long narration, right? And scholars have written books just on the explanation of this hadith in showing the description of the Hajj of the Prophet ﷺ, because it is extremely detailed. He literally went through all of the steps that the Prophet ﷺ took. So he says that when he came after the tawaf to the maqam, he placed the maqam of Ibrahim between himself and between the Kaaba, and then he prayed 2 rak'ahs and he recited in them قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ and قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ and قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. So therefore it is the sunnah to also recite these 2 surahs in the rak'ah of tawaf. In the hadith of Ibn Abbas, so that's the second time. The third time, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma says in the hadith, and it's in the Tirmidhi, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقرأ في الوتر بسبح اسم ربك الأعلى وقل يا أيها الكافرون وقل هو الله أحد في ركعة ركعة. That the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم would read in his witr prayer سبح اسم ربك الأعلى, قل يا أيها الكافرون, قل هو الله أحد, each one in each one of the rak'ahs. Right? In the 3 rak'ahs of witr, he would read these 3 surahs. So we have the 2 rak'ahs of Fajr, the 2 rak'ahs of Maghrib, the 2 sunnahs of Fajr and Maghrib, the witr prayer and the tawaf, right? The 2 rak'ahs of tawaf. In all of them, it is established that the Prophet ﷺ would read these surahs. Right? Just as it was the common practice of the Prophet ﷺ in Jumu'ah to read A'la and Ghashiyah. And likewise in the 2 rak'ahs of the Eid prayer, and so on and so forth. So you have certain surahs that the Prophet ﷺ would repeat in certain salahs. Right? From them is Qul Ya Ayyuhal Kafirun in these 4 different salahs that we just mentioned. Just one second, can I just finish this? Because there's one last thing in which the Prophet ﷺ used to read Surah Qul Ya Ayyuhal Kafirun, but it's not a prayer. It is at night before he would go to sleep. In the hadith of Nawfal ibn Muawiyah, that is collected in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad and An-Nasa'i, that he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا أَخَذْتَ مَضْجِعَكَ مِنَ اللَّيْلِ فَقْرَأْ قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ ثُمَّ عَلَى خَاتِمَتِهَا فَإِنَّهَا بَرَاءَةٌ مِنَ الشِّرْكِ ثُمَّ نَمْ عَلَى خَاتِمَتِهَا فَإِنَّهَا بَرَاءَةٌ مِنَ الشِّرْكِ. When you take your bed at night, when you go to sleep, then read قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ and sleep upon it, for indeed it is to free yourself from shirk. Meaning that if you read this and then go to sleep, you have made your intention clear that you're not upon shirk, right? You are upon tawheed. So that's the salah, and then you have obviously this in terms of going to sleep, and that is also an authentic hadith collected in Nasa'i, as we said, and the Musnad of Imam Ahmad and the Darimi, and in other than them as well. Yes.
I was going to say, is it problematic if somebody doesn't read any other surahs, just those 2 in those sunnah rak'ahs?
Is it problematic if someone only reads those 2 surahs constantly? Not necessarily problematic, but it is also, I would say, good sometimes not to read them, because they are not wajib. It's not an obligation. And anything which is not an obligation, sometimes to change it is also something which is good. Like Umar radiallahu anh used to do sometimes when he was leading the salah and he would come across a verse of prostration, he would make the prostration and people go into prostration. But then sometimes when he would come across that same surah and that same verse, he wouldn't make the prostration. And when people asked him, he would say to show people that this is allowed and that's allowed. It's not an issue that is obligatory. Right? So I would say that your general practice would be that yes, you would read those 2 surahs, but if on the odd occasion you don't, then it's not something which is, which is a problem. I mean,
well, the previous hadith which mentioned the 3 surahs of the witr, can that be used as the evidence to say that it's better to read 3 than the witr?
So can the evidence, or can the hadith that we just mentioned the 3 surahs for witr, be used as an evidence that it's better to read 3 rak'ahs for witr? That is, as the scholars say, the 3 rak'ahs of witr is adna al-kamal. It is the minimum best that you can do, right? That's the optimum that you should strive to do, right? So 1 is less than this, 3 is the minimum, but it's reported that the Prophet ﷺ would sometimes read more. But 3 is generally considered to be, like the best that you can. Just as, for example, in rak'ah, in ruku' and in sujood, you say Subhana Rabbil Azim, Subhana Rabbil A'la. 3 is the best recommended number, right? Minimum. Whereas if someone was to read 1, their prayer is still correct. It doesn't become incorrect because they've done the bare minimum, but the optimal minimum is that they read 3. Right? And that's similar to this issue of the witr prayer, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. If there's any questions from anyone online as well, please feel free to post them. So these are just hadith to show you how how strongly the Prophet ﷺ not only was attached to this surah, number 1, number 2, how it's something which he would incorporate in his daily life by reciting them at different portions of the day, right, and different times and places. And then number 3, the link between the 2 surahs that are mentioned together, right? Surah Al-Kafirun and Surah Al-Ikhlas, they go together hand in hand. One is to speak about Allah Azza wa Jal being free of shirk, and the second is to speak of the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ikhlas. And that's why Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma said there is not a surah in the Quran that is more difficult to bear upon Iblis than this surah, because it is a surah of tawheed and a surah that frees a person from shirk. Not a surah that is more difficult to bear in the Quran than Surah Al-Kafirun upon Iblis, because it is a surah of tawheed and it is a surah of freeing oneself from a shirk. Right? And that's why the scholar said, by the way, that this is one of those surahs that you read to free yourself from shirk, and that's why we said it has the name of muqashqasha, which means that you free and absolve yourself from shirk. From the virtues of this surah that's also mentioned, and we hinted at this last week, 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
What is muqashqasha?
Muqashqasha means to free yourself.
And mushaqshaqa? Same thing? Because remember we said it's a variation of it.
Yeah, I don't remember now. Go back to the transcribed notes. The virtues that we mentioned, we spoke about this in Surah An-Nasr, right? This narration that we mentioned that it's a weak narration, but that is that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, in the hadith of Anas ibn Malik and the Tirmidhi and the Muslim of Imam Ahmad, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he asked him, the Prophet ﷺ asked the man, are you married? He said, no, O Messenger of Allah, I have nothing to get married with, meaning I have nothing for my dowry. So he said to him, do you not have Qul Huwallahu Ahad? He said, yes. He said, it is a third of the Quran. Do you not have إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ? It is a quarter of the Quran. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. It is a quarter of the Quran. إِذَا زُلْزِلَ. It is a quarter of the Quran. Ayatul Kursi. Do you not have that? Then you have much. So get married, right? This is a narration that we mentioned before. As we said, it is a narration that the majority of the scholars of Hadith consider to be a weak narration. But it is something which is mentioned in the books of Tafsir as being a virtue of the surah, which is why I mention it here, but it is a weak narration. But one of the points that is mentioned as to how, remember when we spoke about Surah Al-Ikhlas being a third of the Quran, we said the way that they mention it being a third of the Quran is that the Quran is split into the Tawheed of Allah, generally speaking in terms of content, the Tawheed of Allah, do's and don'ts, right, halal and haram, and stories. And because Surah Al-Ikhlas speaks about Tawheed, it is like a third of the Quran. This surah being a quarter of the Quran, how do they say that it is a quarter of the Quran? Well, they say that it speaks to, in terms of actions, you divide actions into actions of the limbs and actions of the heart. And each one of them, you further divide into halal and haram. So halal actions of the limbs, haram actions of the limbs. Halal actions of the heart, haram actions of the heart. And this surah speaks about the issue of what is not allowed in terms of actions of the heart, right? The shirk aspect. And therefore it becomes a quarter of the Quran. That's something which some of the scholars of tafsir mention in terms of explaining how it is a quarter of the Quran. But as we said, that narration is a weak narration, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So we come on now to the cause of revelation, right? What is the story and the cause of revelation behind this surah? It is mentioned in the tafsir of Ibn Abi Hatim and Imam al-Tabari and Imam al-Tabarani in his collection of hadith and Mu'jam al-Saghir. They mention a narration of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma that the Quraysh came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they gave him a number of offers. They gave him a number of promises. One was that he would become the wealthiest man of Mecca, right? That they would give him wealth and he would become the wealthiest man of Mecca. Number two was that he could marry any woman from amongst them in Mecca, and so on and so forth. And they said to him, we will give you all of this, however you must stop criticizing our gods. You must stop criticizing our gods. And if you refuse, then we have a further offer. So he asked them what was their further offer, and they said, in it is good for us and good for you. 1 year you worship our gods, Al-Lat and Al-Uzza, and the next year we will worship your gods. Right? We will worship your gods. And that narration says that the Prophet ﷺ told them to wait for the response of Allah Azza wa Jal, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this verse, or this surah rather, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, and the verse in Surah Al-Zumar, قُلْ أَفَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ تَأْمُرُونِّي أَعْبُدُ أَيُّهَا الْجَاهِلُونَ. Say to them, do you command me to worship other than Allah, O people of ignorance? وَلَقَدْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ وَإِلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ لَإِنْ أَشْرَقْتَ لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ وَلَتَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. And indeed we have revealed to you and those who came before you, meaning of the prophets, that if you were to make shirk, we would destroy all of your actions and you would be from the losers. بَلِ اللَّهَ فَاعْبُدْ. But rather worship Allah alone, وَكُمْ مِنَ الشَّاكِرِينَ, and be from the grateful. So Allah Azza wa Jal revealed this surah and those verses from Surah Al-Zumar towards the final passage of Surah Al-Zumar. So therefore, what is the cause of revelation? What is the reason behind the surah being revealed? This offer that the Quraysh made, right? And remember that the Quraysh went through so many different stages, right? And there's so much uncertainty in that time. You know, like today, I'm sure as you're all aware, we had that Brexit vote, right? And like the whole country's, no one knows what's going on, no one knows are we going, are we not going, what's happening, and there's so much uncertainty, right? And if you read the news, that's all everyone's talking about. But when you study the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, what you find is that they lived every single day in uncertainty. Every day they wake up, every day they go out. They don't know what they're going to face. They don't know how the Quraysh are going to respond. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know how they're going to be attacked or tortured or persecuted. They don't know what that day will bring or what the next day will bring for themselves and their wealth and their families. It is uncertainty upon uncertainty. And the Quraysh went through many different stages when it came to trying to suppress Islam. From outright violence, just kill them, torture them, persecute them, to give them offers and try to seduce them with offers of wealth and money and power and leadership and fame and what have you, until they even came to this position of, okay, let's be reasonable and let's sit down and let's have a discussion and let's meet some kind of compromise. You know, let's negotiate, right? Let's come and let's compromise. What was the compromise of the Quraysh? Okay, you worship our gods, right, for 1 year, Allat and Uzza and all of those others, and for 1 year we'll only worship your God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This was the compromise that they reached. This narration, by the way, is a weak narration. In and of itself, it is a weak narration. But there is another narration, also mentioned by Imam al-Tabari, rahimahullah, in his tafsir, that Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, and Al-As ibn Wa'il, and Al-Aswad ibn al-Muttalib, and Umayyah ibn Khalaf, 4 of the leaders and the chieftains of Quraysh, came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they said, Ya Muhammad, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, halumma falna'bud ma ta'bud wa ta'budu ma na'bud. Let us come together and we will worship what you worship and you worship what we worship. Wa nushrikuka fi amrina kullih. And we will be partners together. Right? We will be partners together. فَإِنْ كَانَ الَّذِي جِئْتَ بِهِ خَيْرًا مِمَّا بِأَيْدِينَا كُنَّا قَدْ شَرِكْنَاكَ فِيهِ وَأَخَذْنَا بِحَظِّنَا مِنْ. Because if what you have bought is better than what we are already upon, then we will also be partners with you in that good, and we will take a portion of that good. وَإِنْ كَانَ الَّذِي بِأَيْدِينَا خَيْرًا مِمَّا فِي يَدَيْكَ كُنْتَ قَدْ شَرِكْتَنَا فِي أَمْرِنَا وَأَخَذْتَ مِنْهُ بِحَظِّكَ. And if what we are upon is better than what you have brought, then you will be partners with us once again, and you will take from the goodness that we have. So Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed the surah قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Right? And that's a second narration which obviously supports the first narration. It is from a different narrator, but again, as an individual narration, it is weak. It is a weak narration as an individual narration. The third narration is collected by Imam al-Suyuti rahimahullah in his book of tafsir, and I think it's in the Musannaf of Abdul Razzaq, I think. But anyway, that the Quraysh came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they said to him that if you agree with us, we will follow your religion for 1 year, you will follow our religion for 1 year. And Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Right? So these are 3 narrations, and again this third narration is also weak. So we have 3 narrations, all of them speaking about the same cause of revelation, more or less, in slightly different wording, but the same cause of revelation. Each one of them individually is weak, but when we put them together, they become Hasan. They become acceptable narrations, as Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah mentioned in his authentic seerah and in other books of his as well, that each one individually may be weak, but when we bring them together, he said rahimahullah, they become Hasan, they become an acceptable narration. So therefore the cause of revelation, and therefore this supports also the position, as we mentioned at the beginning, of those scholars who said that it is a Makki surah, because the cause of revelation clearly puts it into that time frame of the Meccan period and the discourse between the Prophet ﷺ and the Quraysh of Mecca. Right? And that is that this is the position that they had. So from all of the different strategies that they used with the Muslims, with the Prophet ﷺ, and this shows you, by the way, the weakness of anything that is not based upon the firm principles of Iman and Islam. Because the Prophet ﷺ, his principles are always the same, and his morals are the same, and his convictions are the same. And irrespective of whether it's torture, or whether it's, like giving him wealth, or offering him this or that, or whether it's these types of, let's sit down and compromise and negotiate, he knows where the red lines are. He knows what his principles are. He knows in what he can, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, negotiate and what he can't. What he can compromise and what he can't compromise. And this is a very important lesson for us, because sometimes in our communities, in the issues that we face, the people who represent us don't have that knowledge of Islam. They don't have the knowledge of what is in the religion of Allah you're able to give and take on, and what you can't. Because the Prophet ﷺ on this issue wasn't willing to negotiate. They're willing to negotiate because their religion isn't based upon those principles. They don't have that firm conviction. They're more than happy to do this for a year and do that for a year, because that's the way their religion was. But the Prophet ﷺ isn't willing to compromise. But on other issues, like for example, the most famous example being the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, where there is scope for give and take, for compromise, the Prophet ﷺ not only was willing to do so, but he did so, alayhi salatu wassalam. Right? And that's because it doesn't deal with those issues in which there is no room for maneuver. And that's an important lesson in our own lives, because when we deal with our families, with our communities, when we deal with our friends, when we deal with our spouses and our children, we have issues amongst ourselves, and often and sometimes they are religious issues, or they have religious connotations to them. We have to know what we can compromise upon and what we can't compromise upon. Be that marriage, be that divorce, be that inheritance, be that business, whatever it may be. What are the things that this religion says there is no compromise upon? And what there is compromise upon, so that when you sit you can, yes, give and you can take. That knowledge of awlawiyat, of priorities, of thawabit, of what is firm and established in this religion, of usul, of principles, is extremely important for not only like those issues, but every single day, daily life. And then obviously when those negotiations and those issues are something which don't just deal with me as an individual or my family, but they deal with us as a community, or they deal with the ummah at large, then it is even more important that you have those people at the table to give that advice and to say, no, this is something which in the religion of Allah isn't acceptable, not something which we can compromise on. But yes, maybe that's something which we can give and take upon, because this is what the Prophet ﷺ showed and did in his lifetime, and also it's a lesson that he gives to the companions. Right? It's a lesson that he gives to them, because they will do exactly the same in the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. And further on as well, the scholars have always understood those dynamics. So the Quraysh are willing to compromise, but the Prophet ﷺ isn't willing to do so. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to affirm that principle, He reveals His surah of the Quran, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Right? Surah قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. So that is the cause of revelation. Any questions so far? Or should we go on to the tafsir of the first surah? Okay. You mentioned, this is an online question from, is that Haris? Shaykh, you mentioned witr of Isha a short while ago. Please can you explain 1 rak'ah versus 3 rak'ahs? So, it's allowed to pray the witr prayer in different ways, as long as the odd number of rak'ahs is reported as 1 rak'ah and 3 rak'ahs and 5 and 7 and 9 and 11. It's reported that the Prophet ﷺ allowed all of them. So the most common and the most recommended is to pray 3. And the 3 has 2 formats. The first is that you pray 2 rak'ahs, and then you make the taslim, and then you pray 1 rak'ah. And the other way of praying the 3 is that you pray all together the 3, but without sitting in the middle after the 2. So you don't make it like Salatul Maghrib, even though there is an issue of difference of opinion, I know, among some of the madhabs concerning that. So those are the 2 like common ways. And then obviously if it's 1 rak'ah, you just pray 1 rak'ah and you make the taslim at the end. Right? Okay, so let's carry on. So verse number 1. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Say, O disbelievers. We mentioned before that the word qul, right, which means say, there are a number of surahs in the Quran that begin with qul. How many? How many surahs of the Quran begin with qul? 6. Anyone else?
Minimum 4.
Minimum 4. And maximum? 114. 5. Which are? Ikhlas, Kafirun, Nas, Falaq. Those are the 4 easy ones, right? Which is why the brother said minimum 4. Right? Everyone knows the 4. And the 5th one? Jinn. MashaAllah. Right? Surah Al-Jinn. Right? So 5 surahs of the Quran begin with the commandment Qul, right? Which means say. The Prophet ﷺ is instructed to say. 3 of them, 3 of those 5 are an instruction for the Prophet ﷺ to preach something, to say something to someone else. Right? To say something to someone else. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Say, meaning say to the people, Allah is one. Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun. Say, O disbelievers. Right? He's addressing people. Qul uhiya ilayya annahu istama'a nafarun min al-jinn. Say that it has been revealed to me that a group of jinn came and they listened to the Quran. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ is being told to preach this. The other 2 surahs are also a commandment to say, but they are a personal instruction. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ. Say, I seek refuge. Right? And قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. Say, I seek refuge. Right? And so some of the scholars of Balagha, of Arabic or Quranic eloquence, they mention this like fine point in the differences between these 5. Those 3 are for everyone else to know. But the Mu'awwidhatain, as we mentioned before, because the Sunnah shows that these are surahs that you read right, in the morning, in the evening, after the salahs, and so on and so forth, because of how beneficial they are to you. Right? And so the Prophet ﷺ is being instructed to say them first and foremostly for himself and his family and so on, and likewise therefore us as well. It is foremost for us. Whereas the others are declarations and they are for the Prophet ﷺ is being told to say them for the benefit of the people. So, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ is one of those 5. Allah Azza wa Jal says قُلْ, and then He says يَا أَيُّهَا, يَا أَيُّهَا, يَا أَيُّهَا. 3 words that are brought together into one. Each one of them is to draw attention. So ya means oh, right? We would say oh Amin, right? Oh Uwais, oh this, oh that. It's to draw attention, to call, right? In Arabic it is called harfun nida, right? The word of calling on the call, the address, right? You're calling someone, oh so and so, right? Ya Fatima, as is mentioned in the Sunnah, many hadith, Ya Fatima, Ya so and so, Ya. The Prophet ﷺ would call people and address them by name, and is to draw their attention. Ayyu also does the same thing in the Arabic language, and the ha at the end also does the same. So you have emphasis upon emphasis upon emphasis 3 times in drawing the attention of a certain group of people. And that's to show, number 1, the eloquence of the Quran, the eloquence of this, of how Allah Azza wa Jalla is addressing this issue. But number 2, to show the seriousness and the importance of the issue. That there is no scope for negotiation. Especially if you take that first verse in light of what we said was the cause of revelation. Because the Quraysh think that it's something easy, right? We just come sit down, you worship your gods for 1 year, I'll worship my gods the next year, and we'll all come together and we'll swap and change, and it's all okay and it's all fine, and we can switch and we can do this, right? And this is something which even today you have, right? People who say, oh no, it's fine, all of the religions are the same, there's no difference, it's all the same thing, whatever else. Allah Azza wa Jal is emphasizing not once, but not twice, but 3 times. That no, these aren't issues which are just simple. They're not just issues which you can, just sit down over a cup of tea and think that it's okay and it's fine. These are serious issues, because this is the foundation and the basis of Islam. So 3 times they're called to show them that this isn't something that they're messing around. And I don't think that in the English language we have an equivalent. Because you don't say, oh, right? You don't say that 3 times. I don't know if there's an English equivalent to repeating that type of emphasis, right? It's like saying, oh you there, right? Oh you, or something. It's like emphasizing the same thing 3 times in slightly different ways to show that it is something which is extremely important. And that is what the prophets, that is what Allah Azza wa Jal does in the Quran. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses them as al-kafirun, the disbelievers. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Say, O disbelievers, right? And in the other verse that we mentioned in Surah Al-Zumar, that we said in one narration, it said that the Surah Kafirun was revealed, and some of the verses of Surah Al-Zumar. In that verse, قُلْ أَفَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ تَأْمُرُونِي أَعْبُدُ أَيُّهَا الْجَاهِلُونَ. Say, do you command me to worship other than Allah, O people of ignorance? تَأْمُرُونِي أَيُّهَا. Right? The two emphasis, the ya isn't mentioned there, but the two other forms of emphasis on calling and address are mentioned in Surah Al-Zumar. تَأْمُرُونِي أَعْبُدُ أَيُّهَا الْجَاهِلُونَ. Right? O you people of ignorance. And Allah Azza wa Jal interchanges these two terms. Right? Allah Azza wa Jal interchanges these two terms. Kafirun and Jahilun. Disbelief and ignorance. Why? Because disbelief is based upon ignorance. It is a lack of knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal and the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what is befitting for Allah Azza wa Jal. It is a lack of knowledge of those things that lead people to then worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As mentioned, I think we mentioned the narration before of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, when he mentions the first form of shirk that appeared on earth. Right? Its origin comes from what? Comes from ignorance, right? A lack of knowledge. When people thought that those before the time of Nuh alayhi salam, that the idols that they had built were gods besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a form of ignorance. Right? It is a form of ignorance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Iblis thought that because he was made of fire, that he was therefore better than a creation that was made from a lesser form, namely clay and mud. It is a form of ignorance in Allah Azza wa Jal that the Quraysh would hand mold their gods from food, from dates and barley and wheat, and then they would eat those same gods, but it wouldn't make sense to them that what they're doing is something which completely goes against what should be the attributes of a deity and of a god. It is ignorance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whenever someone performs an act of shirk or an act of disobedience or innovation or whatever it may be, it is because always of a lack of knowledge. Right? And that's why some of the scholars said in the verse of the Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lists sins, they said that it is listed in order of decrease to increase of priority and severity. قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشِ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ. Allah Azza wa Jalla has made haram all types of evil, what is apparent and what is hidden, وَالْإِثْمِ and sin, وَالْبَغْيَ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ and oppression without any due cause, وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا, and that you should associate with Allah partners for that which He has sent down no authority, وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and that you should say about Allah what you have no knowledge of. Some of the scholars say that those are in order of severity, right? The least severe to the most severe. And shirk is mentioned not as the last one, but the one before the last. There is a further one, and that is what is the basis of shirk, and that is to worship Allah upon ignorance, to think that this is what Allah Azza wa Jal wants, and it is based upon ignorance, not knowing the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the famous hadith of Mu'adh radiyallahu anhu, Ya Mu'adh, أتدري ما حق الله على العباد وحق العباد على الله. Do you know the right that Allah has upon His slaves and the rights of the slaves upon Allah? And he said, Allah and His Messenger know best. The Prophet ﷺ said the rights of Allah upon His slaves, that they worship Him alone and don't associate anyone in worship with Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the rights of the slaves upon Allah is that if they do so, He won't punish them. That is the rights that Allah has placed upon Himself and the rights that Allah Azza wa Jalla has placed upon us regarding Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And so this is an issue which Allah Azza wa Jalla therefore addresses in this surah. Right? When He addresses people in these two terms, and they are mentioned in the Quran in different ways and forms. For example, Allah Azza wa Jalla says concerning those people who worship other than Allah, إِنْهُمْ إِلَّا كَالْأَنْعَامِ, they are like cattle. بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ سَبِيلًا, but rather they are more astray. Right? More astray. And when Allah Azza wa Jal speaks about the people in Surah Al-Fatiha, people who worship Allah without knowledge, He calls them وَلَضَّالِينَ, the people of misguidance, right? People who have gone astray, thinking that they're worshipping Allah upon knowledge, that they're doing good, but in reality it is not something which is based upon anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants or approves of, or that Allah Azza wa Jal has legislated or ordained in this religion. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls them out in these terms. Right? He speaks to them. Because why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing them the severity, number one, of the issue that they're speaking about. And obviously, as we all know, what was the main contention? What's the main issue between the Prophet ﷺ and the Quraysh? It's not an issue of family, it's not an issue of wealth, it's not an issue that they considered him to be untrustworthy, because they used to call him Al-Amin and As-Sadiq, and they would give him all of these praiseworthy titles sallallahu alaihi wasallam before Islam. The issue between them that is at play is an issue of La ilaha illallah. That's where the difference came in. And so now when it comes to that same basis and that same foundation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about it in unequivocal terms. Very direct and very open and very blunt. And Allah Azza wa Jal calls them in those terms. And inshallah next week when we carry on with this tafsir of the first verse, we'll speak about how some of the scholars said, does the al in al-kafirun, is it just for the Quraysh or is it for everyone? Who does it include? Who does it include? Inshallah ta'ala when we go into it in more detail. Yeah, I mean, Wais.
Yeah, you said worse than shirk is worship of Allah in ignorance. Would it not be correct to say that, maybe this, the last one, this ayah is talking about ascribing to Allah or speaking about Allah that which you don't know?
Yeah, so it's all the same thing. So in that verse when Allah Azza wa Jal says, and to speak about Allah that which you don't know, right? There's also a worship of Allah Azza wa Jal upon ignorance, right? Because when a scholar or when a person, any person, speaks about the religion of Allah without knowledge, because propagating the deen, propagating knowledge, giving da'wah, teaching Islam and so on, are all forms of worship. So essentially it comes back to the same issue, right? And both of them are obviously manifestations of the same thing.
What's the reference for that surah? What? Is it in a surah?
قل إنما حرم ربي الفواحش. What surah is that? Is it An'am or is it A'raf? A'raf, huh? Ayah 33, mashallah. Look at that. Dr. Zakir likes in the house. So, chapter number 7, verse number 33. It better be now. You can't do that and then say to me, I hope, I wish, inshallah. Right. Let me just take this this question online. Shakila Ali, is it alright to read these 3 rak'ahs as 2 rak'ah nafil and 1 rak'ah witr with 2 salams? They're all considered to be part of the witr. The scholars in Arabic, they call it shafa' al-witr, which means 2 odd, 2 even, and then one odd, right? 2 even and 1 odd. But the 3 together are considered to be witr, and Allah knows best.
Unless she's specifying the 2 nafil to be something else in which case.
Yeah, if you mean something else, then please post something, clarify that. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I was wondering, you might have answered this question already, but the Quraysh of that time did believe in Allah.
Yeah.
Instead, they made it popular. So instead of calling them kafirun, why don't Allah call them mushrikun, ya'ni mushrikun?
Okay, so that's a good question. So the question is, why does Allah Azza wa Jal call them kafirun and not mushrikun? Because they believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? The 2 terms, kafir and mushrikun, in the Quran are to some degree interchangeable. Because they are kafirun because they disbelieved in the oneness of Allah. And they are mushrikun because they associated Allah, others, in Allah's worship. So they have both titles and both of them fit them. And Allah Azza wa Jal sometimes uses this and sometimes uses that. Right? They are kafirun, they are disbelievers because they disbelieve in Allah's oneness. And they are mushrikun because they commit shirk, they add partners in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah Azza wa Jalla addresses them with this and with that, just as He addresses them as dhalimun, as oppressors, because they have oppressed the right of Allah, that is His greatest right. And Allah Azza wa Jalla addresses them as jahilun, as we said, ignorant people, because they are people of ignorance. Right? And Allah Azza wa Jalla calls them fasiqun, right? Because they have caused fisq, they have caused evil upon the earth, right? With their sins. And he calls them mufsidun, because they have caused corruption upon the earth by not ruling with the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these terms are used to describe them. Right? And they used to describe not only them, but even the disbelievers of previous nations as well.
So every mushrik is a kafir, when every kafir is a mushrik.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Any sisters have any questions? No.
You know, last week you mentioned all creation worships, says that the tasbih for Allah. Is that only in reference, I mean, all creation as in trees and mountains and stuff? Is that only in reference to what Allah created, or is it reference to what man-made stuff, like for example, construction?
No, so it refers to some of the brothers asking last week when we mentioned that everything glorifies Allah and praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that in reference only to Allah's creations, or even things which are man-made? It is in reference to Allah's creations, what Allah created, right? So it's not something like the microphone and the table and so on, no. It's what Allah Azza wa Jal created. And obviously the exception to that also is the disbelieving humans and the disbelieving jinn, because they don't praise Allah and glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that way. Just as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, for the disbeliever or for the person who's punished in their grave, when they're struck on their head in the grave, they scream, and it is a scream that is heard by every creation except for the humans and the jinn. Right? And so these are certain things that Allah Azza wa Jal has given to certain things from His creation in a manner that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
Do Muslims bury non-Muslims?
Do Muslims
Bury non-Muslims?
bury non-Muslims? What do you mean? What do you mean?
Do they put them underneath the ground and put them?
Can they bury non-Muslims? Can Muslims bury non-Muslims?
Yes. Meaning of
Yeah, they can bury non-Muslims, yeah. If they have to bury non-Muslims, yeah.
Only the janazah.
But do you mean, can you pray the janazah? That's the difference. Oh. Okay. Okay, so inshallah I think we'll stop there. Barakallahu feekum. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Can you attend the funeral of a disbeliever? You should necessarily seek forgiveness of them, but
Not the religious aspect.
nowadays everything's become centered around irreligious.
No, because if they have, like, for example, a church service, then
Yeah.
even like secular Christians may still go to church for the funeral.